they don't have the persistence, to stick to the. They just get frustrated at some point because it's too much banging the head against the wall, even when you can see how this stuff works. So I guess it is a certain type of mindset you need, to stay at it.
I think a lot of it. By the way, if it's okay, I did start the recording on this.
I heard. No worries.
Yeah, here's what's interesting is I've been at this a long time, and I learned something. I mean, I got goosebumps right now. I got goosebumps right now thinking about what I learned in the last week. And I don't know how to explain that to people because they think, that there's that I have an answer or you have an answer or whatever. But what I've learned is I keep drilling down. I'm looking for that harmonic. I'm looking for the resonance, that one tone. And I don't know if you've heard the last, I call it blips. The blips now are just short conversations that Linda has recorded. Yeah. Those are the blips, and so they're not
to them.
Well, and I appreciate Linda doing those or recording those because just like any conversation I have with anybody, they're welcome to record it between them and myself. The people recording this call without my permission, no, that's not right. But here's
and it
the
probably
thing.
Happens.
Well, it probably happens because the presumption is everybody's part of the public. That's the presumption. That's the presumption is everybody's part of the public. And I had another blip 6 come out yesterday or whatever because of Linda, but I'm extremely visual. And I envision things happening. So I open my gate and I walk out my gate. And I'm walking down the street as a private man in the public. A private man in the public, walking down the street. Now, in the last so many, maybe decade, let's say, they've been establishing cameras, especially in Europe, but there's cameras, at the street corners here. Now, imagine a camera on a utility pole that captures me, a private man, walking down the street. That's a trespass. I didn't give anybody permission to look at me. I didn't give anybody permission to film me. I didn't give anybody permission to capture my image. And on a private man, that's a legitimate claim. But if I'm considered part of the public, then I lose my right to privacy. So if there's a piece of me that they cut off at the port of entry to the public realm, Rome, so to speak, if there's a piece of me that I have forgotten, left behind, that gets a title and becomes part of that public, I don't get to open my gate and walk down the street and presume privacy. Because the presumption on their side is everything is public. So what we're filming with our cameras is the public. There are no private people out there. But that's not a true statement. The truth of the matter that begins at fertilization is that I am private from fertilization to last breath unless I volunteer or to self-sacrifice or volunteer a piece of me to become part of the public. And then with that voluntary, the will to participate, I lose my right to privacy. I'm just saying right now that when I started thinking about my kingdom, my godly estate, and the limits of it, the limits of that godly estate, that's when I went, oh my God, I have a fence around my kingdom, having this knowledge. The fence around my kingdom establishes the right to privacy, and everything from the fence inward, it's all private. if somebody's walking down the street and they decide to hang an advertisement on my fence, doesn't matter what, any commercial advertisement at all, that's a trespass. If they try to label me with as a liberal, or as a conservative, or as a Democrat, or a Republican, or as a Christian, or as an atheist, if they try to label me and they hang that label on my fence, that's a trespass. Any presumption that is acted upon, any belief system, any superstition that they hang on my fence is a trespass. And that's where I've gotten to in the last couple of weeks is realizing once your boundary is established, then everything that is presumed, assumed, attachments, any attachments to that property at all, that private property, is a trespass, and I mean everything. Citizenship, trespass. Religion, trespass. Commercial character, trespass. All of that stuff. Any belief system, any presumption is a trespass. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it works. That's the presumption. Because it works through a presumption, that's the only way it can work. Because it's funny when you look at these. For example, we had a conversation recently about maxims. I can send you that. That was recorded also. I can send you the link when it's out. But basically. The maxims, when you look at them and when you can see what they say and how they can be applied, they actually prove that the transfer or the limitation of your rights or status, it doesn't happen. And the system knows it doesn't happen. So the only way it can work is that it needs to build a presumption that might have happened, which then people need to validate, and they do it. I don't think many of us, many people do it consciously. So you're not actually volunteering, but your conduct is implying that you are accepting that redefinition of your status or limitation of your rights, which is same as the identity. So the two key components in this system are the underlying presumption and then the implication of consent that arises from people's conduct, not necessarily even words. Well, often it does also from the words. If people go around and flashing the ID and telling their social security number and birth date and all this, then it's like explicit, but it's still not conscious. It's only built on the presumption that is not rebutted, but rather it's validated. And that when you can see that in action, it's really appalling. Because you can see also that most of the people don't realize what's happening. And even most of the people on the other side don't know what's happening. That's the only way they know how to run their show. It's crazy. And I don't know about how your approach, how much you are in contact with these guys, but I've kept on the conversation with these people,
right.
And I'm becoming more and more direct. So I've taken the approach that, as quickly as somebody starts making those presumptions, I'm just starting to talk about the real deal, and say that, okay, I understand, I know exactly what you're doing. You're making a presumption. And I can't validate it. I have to rebut it because it's not true. And I can show you how it's not true. And if you can't handle it, and most of them can't, they just drop the ball. But at least I get the message there. At least I get it on the record that I'm rebutting it. I'm not accepting it.
That's the key. But Bill, that's the key. And that's the key.
Yeah, you have
to do something to rebut it.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise the presumption works. And that's the only way it works. They are collecting, last time we talked about this being an evidence collection game, where they are making a presumption and then they are in a way collecting evidence of your consent, whether it comes from your words or terms that you use unknowingly or your conduct as an implication. But they take it as evidence and validation of their presumption. Even when both sides are probably, in most cases, both sides of the table don't realize what's happening. But once you see that, and that's what the beautiful thing about this what we've been doing is that we can see the system now. You can see immediately what's happening, and then you can start talking about that. Because nothing works unless they get that identity nailed on you. And you can always bring it back to that question. Attached to you. Yeah.
Joinder, attached.
Yeah. So it's funny because a lot of these people who are not necessarily in as much detail or depth in this as we've been doing, there is that realization that the identity and the registered personality is like it's distinct from yourself and it's something else. But most of the people didn't dig deep enough to know how it's done and how it works. But when you can see those things, then the conversation becomes very, very, very different, because you don't have to, it's not an argument when you can see that all the paperwork is theirs. And so you can have a totally different attitude to it and just say that, hey, okay, you're making a presumption and I'm rebutting it. Let me finish that by this. There's one guy in Germany who's just brilliant. He has so concrete, and we've been chatting quite a few times lately. But he has so concrete things that he does. So he would just go to the population register, and he would ask them to identify himself.
I love that. I love that, because that's the presumption. The presumption is that they know who you are.
Yeah. And you just flip the table and say, well, if you have all the info, then identify me. But they cannot do it. Of course. They need your consent. And then he's like, okay, well, what is this worth then? And then another one was, I don't remember if it was him or somebody else. They went to the church books and then just basically put their fingerprints on the church books on top of the entries, and then it's like, they were like physically thrown out pretty quickly. But just a little tinkering like that, which exposes the narrative basically completely and expresses that people don't take it as granted. There's and
I love that idea. If you think about this, you're driving down the road, and by the way, when I use words as the author of my story, you and I know that what the words are intended to mean. So I'm driving down the road, and let's just say I get pulled over. Some lights come on behind me, and I stop the car. The only way those lights can come on behind me is a presumption. They can't come on behind me unless something is presumed. So somebody comes up in a uniform with guns and badges that are threatening, by the way, ask you to basically identify yourself with an ID or whatever. And here's the dilemma. They've already presumed that they know they have authority to stop you. You're going to hand them documents that evidence that authority. Now, here's the interesting thing is, if they stopped you, there's a presumption they know you. So when somebody comes up to your window and says, license and registration, you go, well, wait a minute here. You already presume you know me, because without knowing me, you had no right to stop me, no jurisdiction. So you tell me who I am. You tell me who I am, because you have to know that. Yeah, you have to know that before you even stop me. So who am I?
Yeah.
And now what? Now we're going to have a problem, because now it's a trespass. Now that's a threat, because they didn't have a right to stop you until you handed them the documents that evidence the presumption was true. And what happens when you question them? Hey, apparently you already know who I am, because those lights identify your jurisdiction over some property. So as long as you stopped me, there was a presumption you had a right to stop me. Otherwise, this is a threatening. This is piracy. This is an act of piracy, because you don't have the right to stop me, but you're presuming you know who I am, and whoever that person is within the jurisdiction or your authority to stop. Now you need to tell me who I am.
Yeah. It's also, I've had some funny conversations about that. I was emailing to the customs and the foreign ministry about the diplomatic immunity, and basically saying that how could they presume that there is no diplomatic immunity, because that immunity is not granted by them. If you have a foreign diplomat, that status is not granted by the other country, which in this case is a wrapper, right? So and the word in international law, the only thing that refers to that, you might have a situation where somebody needs to present their appropriate powers. That's the term. So it's the diplomat who presents their appropriate powers, and that's linked to sovereignty directly. And as we know, sovereignty does not come from recognition. It's an inherent status. It doesn't require recognition. And it went quite high up in the foreign ministry, and I was saying citing directly those conventions and saying, look, you guys, you know that this doesn't require recognition. So it's not your decision whether that status is valid or not. And they just couldn't get anywhere with it, because they were totally stuck on, we have to recognize and somehow grant that status. But that's not at all what it says in those treaties. And that's when it gets really crazy, because basically now the email correspondence, I have tons of emails which show that even the top level offices they don't they have a wrong idea about how it works, because they are so accustomed to the system as it is, and they act as if the inherent sovereignty didn't exist at all. These people talk like recognition of another state is the only way to somehow obtain sovereignty. But it's not something that somebody else can give to you.
Thank you. And that's a huge thank you from me, because what you just described is most people are out there waiting for some external authority to grant them authority. In other words, they're looking for permission to become the sovereign. And that's not how it works. Inherent sovereignty began at fertilization. It begins at fertilization. And that sovereignty is what gives you immunity to all fictions. That reality trumps fiction. Fictio sit veritas. Yeah. But reality begins at fertilization, and once you understand that even the biblical I and my Father are one, when you understand that the etymology of Father is supreme being, and when you start to go all the way back to the beginning, the origin, the font, the fountain, where all sovereignty emanates from, which I'm completely with you. These guys out there in their fiction believe it needs to be granted or recognized by them, but fictions cannot recognize. It can't do anything. And so it's our actions, which you said earlier, it's our actions of sovereignty. But again, I don't use the word sovereignty very often because it is inherent. It is already there. And too many people are waiting for somebody else to say, yes, you are. No, I'm sorry, but that's not necessary from fertilization. Yeah,
and it's totally the opposite, because the way it's structured like this, the system, because they cannot take it away. They cannot take it away, and that's why it has to be built on a presumption, an assumption, which is then kind of like sneakily fed to people to the point where they then do something which implies that they accept the limitation of their powers. So it's all make believe, but the way it's structured in itself is proof that the status cannot be taken away. If you know, and if you reflect on that, how else could it be? It couldn't come from anybody else. We're all here exactly the same way, right? And by the way, governments, people existed before governments by default, because government is a creation of people. So
you mean external, collective? You mean collective government, because your government is upon your shoulders.
Yeah.
Is upon your shoulders. It's your own mind and your ability to self-govern, which is basically keeping your dog on a leash, your animal on a leash.
Yeah. Maybe I should use the term regency more. I like to use that, because to me it looks like they are running a regency by through presumptions. And let me give you another. I think this happened after we talked last time. But they sent out some voter cards. There was an election. And then I noticed that those voter, you have to have that document. Like they send the documents to people's addresses and on the register, and then you people would bring that paper when they go and vote. Now, I just scanned it and I sent it to the Ministry of Justice and the Parliament, and I said, look, this paper is addressed to the registered person, the citizen, right? And if you look at the Constitution, the citizens don't have the power to give the vote that you're asking them to give. the people have the
power.
The power, but not the citizens. But these papers are addressed to the citizens, and then it says that you have to identify yourself as a citizen with some document when you go there. So what I'm asking is, like, what the hell are people voting for? Because citizens can't cast these kinds of votes. And it was funny because a very high director of the DOJ replied to me, and he totally exposed the way they think. So first of all, he kind of he started by saying that I don't usually answer these kinds of emails, but I'm gonna do it now.
Right.
And this is like one of the top guys there. And then he said, first of all, people it means people as a whole. And he, of course, I don't know if he knows it or realizes it or not, but yeah, that's true. But it doesn't mean whole as collectively. It means each one of us as whole. But he wrote it exactly like that. I think that guy might be, knowledgeable enough to specifically answer it like that, making it sound like I would believe he implies that this means people collectively as a whole, but then again covering his own rear by, having the deniability to say that, well, you can read that both ways. And then at the end, he said that, well, when you start making a distinction between citizens and people, when I was citing the exact wording in the Constitution, he says that that's theoretical philosophical discussion. Okay, yeah, again, when you look at those terms, yeah, you can probably say it like that. But that's a ridiculous statement to make, because that's a law, right? Even in their own book, that's how it's supposed to work. So it's the same thing as me speeding down the road, and somebody says that, this is dangerous and this is not supposed to happen, and I'm replying that it's just theoretical philosophical discussion, right? So they can't. These guys cannot face the facts. They hide behind that kind of bullshit immediately if they bother to answer, and it's amazing because you can rip those answers apart immediately. You just look at what is this? This is a guy who are we gonna have this conversation with if these people act like children, in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they are, by the way. They are children.
Yeah. That's the funny part. And I had to develop a new mindset because I was pretty frustrated in the beginning and got almost, a little bit pissed. But that doesn't help because they don't get it. But what we can do all the time is just not give them any slack and just keep laser focus on the main question. Like you're clearly saying here that this is all built on your assumption. And if needed, by the way, I know exactly how that presumption was created in the first place. And if you want education on that, let's talk about it. But you have to be able to talk about it openly. You can't fall back into this bullshit.
You said you were talking earlier about getting a voter's card in the mail addressed to the character. I don't think I talked about this years ago, but I don't think people actually understood what I was saying. You said the people have a right to do something, but the citizens do not. That's where that's the same exact situation here. I'm going to say the United States of America, because when I say United States of America, it includes both the United States and America. If I talk about only one, a United States election based upon our conversation, you and I would understand. When I say United States, I'm talking about the country, which is everything. But that's not, it gets subdivided in a way that the United States could become a completely different entity, being just a commercial corporation, established in Delaware, let's say. Well, here's what's interesting about the elections. I don't say we have one coming up, but this place or this company, the United States, has an election coming up in 2024 again. And what's interesting is people don't realize that when they go there to participate as a citizen, and this is really critical because the way this election is built, they call it's an electoral college system, meaning that Illinois has so many votes, Nevada has so many votes, New York State has so many votes, Wisconsin, all these different states have a number of electoral college votes based upon what was supposed to be population or whatever. But here's the thing. Every citizen every U.S. citizen, 100% of U.S. citizens emanate from the District of Columbia. That's where they're located. So when all of the U.S. citizens vote, 100%, it doesn't matter if 50 million citizens vote, 75, it doesn't matter how many millions of citizens vote, the District of Columbia only has 3 electoral college votes out of 100, or out of 540, or something like that. So the District of Columbia, with every citizen voting, only has 3 electoral college votes. What's the likelihood that all of those citizens voting will ever get who they want in that presidential office? None, 0. None. It's not possible that three electoral college votes can sway, can determine anything. That's 100% of the population of citizenship. Three electoral college votes. That's it. So participation in that system is a joke. It's an absolute joke. There's no reason to cast any vote. First of all, it's none of your business. The United States is none of my business. Why would I even pretend to participate in somebody else's business? But that's the huge thing. That's a huge thing that three electoral college votes doesn't do anything. And so it might be wise to stop pretending that your vote counts.
Yeah, I think there's two. What I can see, there's 2 effects of the whole system running. One is, of course, that it creates the belief that you're actually, you doing that has some meaning, and then people, believe in that. So it's a purely psychological effect. But the other one, the other required element there is something that I drilled. I sent a number of emails directly to the Parliament, and I actually started from the Parliament library or the Parliament archives, and then it trickled up all the way to like the Prime Minister's office. But my question was basically this: that do you have any document in your archives that evidences that the legislative power has been granted to the Parliament by the people? That was the question. Like, what document proves that? And I knew when I started that they can't answer it, because the only document that actually does that is the birth certificate. That's the document, because that creates the presumption of regency.
Oh,
and when the regency,
my God! Oh,
yeah.
No.
And when the regency presumption, it's amazing. That's the document.
All right, ready?
And well, I'll just finish this. One more thing. But they eventually replied me that no, there is no such document. As
you asked, you were asking them a very specific question about a document that grants that authority, right? I mean,
yes, specifically the legislative authority.
The legislative authority. That's what, and that was your question. That leads perfectly into this really weird thing that I saw a while back. That afterbirth material, the fetal, the combined, or the combination, the composition of matter that is patentable at 35 U.S.C. 101. Composition of matter, 2 things, the tertium quid, the combined mom and baby's biology, which is neither mom's nor baby if left as is. That composition of matter that gets that, I'm going to call it a title. which becomes the entitlement, by the way. That title, and this is addressing directly what you just said, that the time in the womb, from fertilization all the way to the threshold, which is the vagina and the portal to the world outside the womb, that time in the womb has been forgotten. Because it's forgotten, there's a vacuum in nature. And nature abhors a vacuum. So what they did with the forgotten time in the womb is they legislatively, or they created what we know of as a statute. The statute, which we recognize as the birth certificate, is the legislated matter. I mean, they construct it, they put it together themselves, and it's delivered through the UPU or the postal system. It's a post, and we're supposed to be the guards at that post, and it's all, I hate to say it this way, but it's Christianity, because what it's identifying, what that statute is identifying, is your fundamental. I'm going to call it Christian fundamentalism. It's the fundamental origin of man. Your direct link to God.
Yeah.
And once they clamp and cut the umbilical cord, and that matter, that subject matter is left behind, and given that title, that title is the title of a statute, statute, statute. And when you do not know that it is the rest, residue, and remainder of your godly estate, it becomes known as a statute at large. A statute at large is an unclaimed statute. It's basically your inheritance, your inherent existence from fertilization. Yeah. It's been unclaimed now. And it becomes the deposition or the deposit into the global public trust, the In God We Trust or whatever. But it's a statute at large, which and if you look up at large, it's defined as a stray, S-T-R-A-Y. And it is literally you filled with the Spirit of God, the living, breathing, supreme being standing before the mirror. It becomes the image, the decedent estate image of God. And now, and of course, God reflected as D-O-G, dog. And what they've done is they're looking at that statute at large as an animal foray or a stray animal to be captured. And the reason I brought this up is because it is the legislated statute that they're using as the public. I mean, the dog, the stray dog, the statute at large, whatever you want to call it, is out there in the public, and it's available for capture. Now, it's available for them to capture, or you to recapture, to reclaim. But you don't. If you reclaim it, you're also claiming property that isn't yours, which is mom's. So even if you reclaim it, in their system, there has to be a negotiation done at the highest levels, because Rome is claiming the accretion. Rome is claiming the motherland, or the mother part of the statute. So there's a recompense. There's actually, it's an international arbitration through this third person statute at large. That's why me sitting here at my dining room table in what they're viewing as Winnebago County or Illinois or whatever, geographically I'm just at I'm at coordinates. But there is that birth certificated statute at large that is what they're using on a global level, the UN level, to be more specific. That's the measure that keeps the peace out there in the public. So they're able to then leverage that statute at large which makes me whole because it has part of my biology. But if I claim it as the birth certificated statute at large, I'm also claiming more than me, which is mom. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you claim the birth certificated statute at large, yeah, sure, it completes my estate, but it also includes something that is not mine. If I don't claim it, then I'm missing a piece of me, which makes me deficient at law or in law, and they have to put me back together. So if I do claim it, I lose. If I don't claim it, I lose. If I know my godly origins fertilization, the statute at large becomes moot. It becomes null and void. So what you're describing, I know when you use the word legislative or legislature, that is the statute that was created as a space holder between fertilization and the cut. That's the space holder. And until the man wakes up and recognizes his godly origin, because nature abhors a vacuum, that space holder is in play. And it's in play for anybody to capture. Anybody. And remember, I mean, even, okay, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm gonna take it really concrete next.
Okay, well, I can say this to you because I know that by connecting a few dots, you get to run with it now. No, I just handed the baton to you, so go ahead. It's your turn to take a lap.
Yeah, I'm not gonna give them slack. That's for sure. But were you still gonna continue? Because
all I'm saying is that the cut evidences your dog off the leash, and our bodies, our physicality, our bodies, our biology is an animal. It's an animal, and they know it as an animal. But when we're conscious and we're self-governing and we have that animal under our control, the dog is not off the leash. That means when we're self-governing and we know fertilization's our godly origin, and we recognize trespass, and we recognize our responsibility to ourselves and the rest of the world, that's you having your dog under control. But by celebrating a birthday, by acknowledging the cut, your dog is off the leash, and now you have, what do they call it? Letters of marque and reprisal. They're able to capture you out there in commerce and pull that dog in. They're dog catchers ultimately, and they're bringing it into the court system to see whose property it really is. Whose property is this? So there's an arbitration process on an international level, just cogents, because that piece is both you in the present and a statute at large in history, a historical statute. And they're trying to figure out who this belongs to, but it all becomes null and void when the truth is known, because the statute cannot exist if I do.
And it's because it's the whole situation is developed through fraud without an actual consent. Then that becomes piracy, and piracy doesn't change ownership. So, another maxim right there, where they actually say that piracy is an attempt to take property, somebody else's property. It's an attempt, and that does not change the ownership. But of course, if the owner is deceived to believe that they have no property, and in this case, the property is the organ, and everything that it implies and evidences, then the piracy can happen. So there's this weird justification that they're always trying to do. And the justification comes from the consent, and when that happens, the actual fraud is overlooked because you basically accept it, or people accept it if they don't rebut it. And it's just so hard to see because nobody talks about these things. So nobody can see how it's actually where the appropriation of the property happens, and that's what I was coming to. If you look at what you said just now, and how I've been taking it, how you can take it in a really, really concrete way. So look at the correspondence I had with the church. Now, remember, I went backwards from the population register. We pinpointed that what is called the breeder document, which is the document sent to the population register, which is the underlying information that is used to create the population register entry. It's called breeder document. That document is from the church, and it's called a notification of a child to a population register. Now, I got that document, and I had some correspondence with the church about it. And my question, there was a number of questions, but what I got from them is that, first of all, that document is church's property. The document belongs to the church. It has nothing to do with me or my parents. Secondly, it's signed by the church. They signed it. They own it. They were the ones who made that notification. So, my next question, and they said this is all proven, and they admit it. So then the next question is, well, since you created this person, where did you get the information? Like, what is this notification about? Like, how did you know anything about this child? And where did you get the information from? And they said, we got it from the hospital. Not from my parents. They got it from the hospital. Now, the specific question was, and this is fun to drill into, we got the information from the hospital. And my immediate follow-up question was, what information and in what format did you get from the hospital? Because I knew at that point that the information is not something on a document. It's the actual organ. It's the human remains. Which ties directly into the, yeah, correct, because the hospital has to, the hospital and the church have there's a legal obligation for the church to if some human remains are found, unidentified human remains are found, they have to bless them. Or I don't know what's the word used. So basically,
last rites or
yeah. So they have to basically say that, you know, we will take care of this perished, whatever, assuming that it's a real human, right? So they will take care of it. And they will then take care of the waste material. So there's the legal obligation for the hospital to deliver that information, and most likely the actual biological remains to the church. And that's the church's role, isn't it?
Does it matter, Bill?
Right?
Bill, let me ask, does it matter how much of the remains exist?
No. It just needs to be enough to say that there is someone This is a human remain.
Okay.
Now, what I see here is, you can look at it and you can probably define it legally as a sea monster or whatever. But what I see happening is the church saying that there was actually a sovereign. Right?
Right.
Now, we are in the position to take care of these people. So what happens is that organ is the evidence of the direct link or the dominion in their books also, right? In the
right.
Bible. It's the evidence of the actual dominion. Now, if you look at how property is defined, property, as you've said it many times, it's a bundle of rights. So what happens between the hospital and the church is that the physical matter, the physical biological property, it just disappears, and it doesn't. That's not actually a big deal anymore, because it's just waste material. But what happens when they receive it is that they receive the bundle of rights. And that's abstract, isn't it? Those are the rights they package in that trust, which they register then as a legal person. And those rights are packaged because nobody's using them. Or so it appears from the paperwork. And that's how the limitation of powers happens. So now you have a trust where those rights are packaged. And then that's basically the same thing as regency. It's the same thing as a sovereign not present. So they are saying that, okay, those rights that are essential for government in both senses, those have to be guarded, and they have to be packaged into this legal wrapper. And because there are no sovereigns claiming those rights, then we get to administer them, because that's our job. And then they claim to help people do that, but in reality they realize probably at some point that this is pretty good business if we don't tell them.
Right, because now you have an intestate situation where property belongs to some infant that has no will. So then all this property ends up under administrative process, basically forever, because the biology they discovered is always an infant.
Yeah, and what I think is good to define there is that the property, people tend to think about it as the physical property, like the physical organ. But the organ is just a medium it's an evidence of the rights, and it's the rights that are packaged, not the physical material.
Absolutely, but that's
at least it doesn't make.
But and that's why they got rid of habeas corpus in 1862 when civil law was introduced to the Americas. They got rid of habeas corpus because they were no longer going to require a physical living being. They were going to use these bundles of rights. This bundles of rights established by by treaty, but also what you're talking about, this legislated, repackaged bundle is basically nothing more than words on a page.
It's the justification of their regency, their assumed regency. They say they can turn around and say, look at this paperwork. If you know how to read it, it's creating a presumption of an absent sovereign.
Missing, presumed dead.
Yeah. And it's a pretty nasty thing when people start turning up, isn't it?
Hospitals.
Right.
Remember, hospitals ultimately were created by the Knights Hospitaller, and remember what their job was. It says just go to Wikipedia, and it says the Knights. What they did is they created a hospital in Jerusalem dedicated to John the Baptist to care for sick, poor, or injured pilgrims. It used to say Christian pilgrims, but they changed it. But what they did is the word pilgrim is you coming ashore, coming to the new world, and all they have are the human remains of those Christian pilgrims. So now they've established the Foundling Hospital, or the Foundling, and a foundling is an infant found after its unknown parents have abandoned it. And everybody abandons that biology at the port of entry and accepts the original sin birth certificated character in its stead. So now you have this foundling left behind that is now subject to the care of the amicus curiae, the care of the church.
Yeah, and it's like, I've been thinking about it a lot, that it's like, so basically, imagine all this evidence as it is. If it could be used completely differently, it could be actually used to help people understand their origin.
Right.
But these guys just are abusing it. And still they claim, they justify that position by that same role, that we have to be here in between because people don't realize their origin. Well, you're not helping it. Because you're de facto hiding it. Like, you're making it so complicated that, even when it's self-evident and you have the permanent evidence, everybody has the mark, you're saying that people just don't get it, and you have to therefore stand as their guardians.
And
you're not helping it.
And they call that faith.
Yeah.
They call it faith. They say that, well, just have faith because you don't have knowledge. So that faith allows us as the middlemen to reconnect you with the truth of the matter. And that's, they're using the missing or presumably abandoned property, and they know it. They know exactly what it is and what it implies. It implies your direct link to God. But if you forget about it or presumably abandon it, then the only way you can get back to your godly origin is through faith and the middlemen that work within that spiritual realm as mediums of exchange. And what's really interesting, and I'm going to shut up for a second after I say this, but there's a court case, Cruden versus Neal, which was 1896 or 1898, and the most interesting thing, most people miss the only thing that's important. They see the word consent, but it's not consent that's important here. It says right in the middle of this document, it says it is not a rule binding upon mankind in their natural state. They're talking about government, majority rule. It says there, every man is independent of all laws except those prescribed by nature. He's not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow men without his consent. The plaintiff here, now they're talking about the actual man that was in this case, the plaintiff here is not stated by the plea ever to have become a citizen or member of North Carolina. The fact is he never was a citizen. Now think about that. They use the word citizen and member. What's interesting, though, is the only thing that is important is it says there, every man, there, when it says there, comma, every man, they're talking about in the natural state, in nature. There, in nature, every man is independent of all laws, all statutes, all codes, all everything, except those prescribed by nature. The only thing that nature is telling us is that we begin at fertilization. That is literally a prescription. I mean, if I don't evidence my beginning, I can't be here now. So everybody claiming a birthday is abandoning nature and going to the narrative. They're just taking on a character born to some Gregorian calendar, not even in reality at all, pure fiction. And so they're abandoning the only thing that Cruden versus Neal is saying. Listen, you get back to nature, you get back to your godly origin, and none of this shit applies to you. Zero. None of it. No majorities, no minorities, no nothing applies to you if you only know your godly origin.
Those every and all are pretty powerful words in law.
Every man
they don't
and
give
all
a lot
laws,
of wiggling room. Yeah.
No wiggle room there, man. There is no wiggle room there. Every man and all laws. Unbelievable.
And it's in a way that isn't that really close to what's in to what Thomas Paine writes and Blackstone and these. They all back in those days. It was self-evident that the government, the foreign government, these government establishments and executive branches and all this, it's an invention of man. It was like pure logic, right? Man has to exist before the government, and it's amazing to me why people don't think through that, because there's a couple of countries every year that are created or disappear, because that's just how things work. And someone has to create those countries. And then there are how many border struggles all over the world, all the time. So by default, the whole system has to, the authority to declare that independency has to exist, and it has to come from people. And that's exactly how it's written in the international law. But it's amazing how people can't see that. It has nothing to do with government. It comes directly from the people who realize that they actually are independent. And then they declare that. It's not a request, you just declare it. And the funniest part is that you don't even need any land in the traditional sense. You don't need to have a territory, because you already got one. You already had one, and that's the motherland. And it was granted to you. You don't have to. The sovereignty doesn't disappear when a territory disappears. The status still remains. And that's all. You even have case law on that, where they try to, I don't know what kind of situations they were trying to solve by cases. As you've said, when you read through some of these cases and look at the terminology and how it fits, it always looks like they are trying to solve some problem or create some decision that would help them then to roll the ball forward. Like they are maybe they didn't even happen. Like they just create this stuff up and write those cases
as they need it.
Exactly, just to keep the show going. But basically, none of these. They never rebut these fundamental questions, and that's the very interesting thing, because it's all over that they cannot neglect that. They cannot outright deny the fact that people are inherently granted the dominion. The only way they can do it is just flood them with information about something else, so that nobody would realize this. That's what it looks like to me. And the funny part of it is that they are so careful about it. Why do they need to be this? Like, if this was all brutality, they wouldn't have to do this. That's the nagging question in the back of my head all the time. It's like, why do they need to be so sneaky? Like, if this was all brutality, then what the hell? It's like it would be totally different. But they are trying to create a really consistent pattern or consistent evidence of the transfer of the guilt or the responsibility to the people who don't understand where they are coming from, so that they can then justify that these people, whatever they call it, insane, paupers, whatever, and we have to take care of them, and therefore we have the authority to basically hurt them and do whatever, horrible things, because these guys don't realize who they are. They justify it like that, and that's it's so crazy.
Yeah, that's why. Just it's interesting. The more I dig, the more I find pacifist as being the greatest position. I mean, in everything I find where they talk about neutrality or whatever these words they choose to use. What I'm finding, though, is that it's the pacifist position, which is allowing reality without trying or forcing anything. In other words, I'm not making a claim to anything because the truth already is. It already is. It's from fertilization to last breath. The truth is that's my personal and private estate, my godly estate. It's mine and mine alone. That's the truth, or that is truth. And what they require is all of us to somehow divide ourselves so that we can be conquered. Yeah. And if you look around enough, you'll see these terms that make no. I mean, here's one right here. Even in the Constitution of the United States, at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, whatever, the Commerce Clause. Commerce. Did I say commerce? It says among the several states. Among the several states. Everything everywhere is always talking about the several states. And everybody just lets that go. But what they don't realize is several is the cut. It's actually
every one of us.
It becomes severed.
Every one of us.
It's severed by our own claim upon a birth certificated statute. Now there's two positions, the unborn and born. The unborn is protected at the highest level, where you got the born, the baby on the land is actually an indigenous person that's suffering, that is going to suffer until he converts. Until the indigenous person on the land, the baby, converts to I'm going to use the word Christianity. If he doesn't convert to Christianity, he can't buy or sell, because it's the converted character that has this acceptance, this number, this whatever. But again, the indigenous baby on the land, even though he is the sovereign when he understands what that means, he can't. He can never claim property. Everything is under guardianship. Everything is under regency. Everything for the indigenous is subject to conversion.
Well, so yes, of course, you have to be able to see and realize how do you actually claim that honor. And it's not really a claim, because it's more a rebuttal of their claim than it is a claim. Because everything
a very bright light of truth.
Yeah, they cannot take it away. I've been having a lot of fun with it, with the fact that you just need to contemplate your own navel. right?
Right.
It's just let's talk about the navel. Like we're all here exactly the same way. And
the belly
it's
button.
Perfect
the
proof,
belly button,
isn't it? Yeah, the belly button, isn't it the perfect proof? It's the perfect proof, and that it's amazing, and that's why the scar as a proof is so important in law. They can't get around it.
No,
and
no. It's the evidence.
But it's the evidence, and all of us have it. So how do you explain that? We all have it. Come on. It's such a, so the frustration. This is the. First of all, it's a lot of fun to have these conversations with these guys, even though it's frustrating. But it gets less frustrating when you can see that they cannot answer these questions, because then you can see that your knowledge is validated by their inability to answer. You know, it takes time to get through this path, because we've been infiltrated with so much bullshit. But once you have to, and that's why I've been saying that you have to get into this interaction with these guys, because that's the best validation. You can think about this theoretically, but until you get into that interaction, it doesn't really hit you.
Bill got cut off. I'm hoping he tries to come back on. I'm going to let it go for a bit. I know there's a dead air, silence, but hopefully Bill will come back on. He said it takes about 10, 15 seconds.
Hi, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I explained.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Just when you get into the good questions, then somehow it cuts. Okay. Yeah. So what I was saying was that
you have
to get into that interaction. You have to do it, because otherwise the theoretical framework, it keeps nagging you. You have to prove it to yourself by confronting it, and the confrontation, the discussion has to happen peacefully, because there's no need to get agitated about it, even though it's brutal when you realize what's happening. But equally important, it's to understand that not the change didn't happen. They can't take those powers away. You just need to be confident enough to realize that it's their claim, and you can rebut it.
Which is a trespass. Their claim is a trespass.
Yeah, if they start insisting on it, it's exactly that. And it's almost like they are provoking you, because then if you get provoked, then they have another justification to get violent, because they can claim, protection, whatever.
What's the interesting thing about what you just said too is that, all of us start at a certain point, and the First Amendment of I'm going to say the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights is not the same thing as the Constitution, although there are amendments. The Bill of Rights are for the living men to be protected from the corporate. But corporate entities don't have the protection of the Bill of Rights. Let me say that again. Birth certificated corporate persons do not have Bill of Rights protections because they're not living men. Only living men are protected by the Bill of Rights. So if you're claiming a birthday, a birth certificated character, you don't have Bill of Rights protection from the corporate because you're actually aligning yourself with the corporate. Now here's what's interesting. The First Amendment, there's all kinds of things in that First Amendment, but the only one that I now actually see as important is the right of the people to peaceably assemble. And most people see that as me and you and a bunch of us getting together. But that's not what it means. It means me to assemble myself, to make myself whole, to recognize my godly connection from fertilization to last breath, to have the knowledge, and now I'm peaceably assembled, and it doesn't require any confrontation. That knowledge bypasses the birth certificated space holder, the statute at large, completely, and now I get to go on about my private business without getting involved in that corporate business.
And even better, you are acting as the people as whole.
Right.
And that's the term they use. But they just make it sound like it's collective when it's not. It's
not collective.
It's the peaceful assembly. And then let me break down the second one. I've been laughing at this because bear means to use as identification. And of course the second word is a limb, an organ. How about that? It has nothing to do. It's nothing to do with violence. The point is that you can use the organ as identification, as proof of your status. That's what the second one is about. At least I read it like that.
And that, which then means, Bill, that there's no reason to change your status because you already have it.
Yeah.
And that's a biggie.
Yeah.
There's people out there making a lot of money on status change.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't mean that you don't have, that you don't have right for self-defense. Of course you have it. That's in the international law by default. Of course you can defend that. But that specific wording just so happens to translate into using an organ as an identification. So and isn't it all the fuss, and people turn it into things related to violence, and then that provokes people to, because that then creates the justification for people to intervene and say, okay, this is getting out of control, this is getting too violent, when you should use it peacefully or peaceably.
And that is just cogence.
Yes.
At the international level, that's the just cogence measure. That organ is the just cogence measure to peaceably assemble. But it was created through an act of violence. It itself, by the cutting, the violent act, the mayhem of the cut, is what then allows that organ to exist separately as a several state. And then they're justifying their administrative process by saying, listen, all these people need our help to get put back together. And
yes.
The reality
is... So this is why they need...
Go ahead.
Let me cut you. But that's why they need the medical establishment there. Because they use the medical emergency to be able to create the paperwork that then results in the presumption. They need some emergency there. Otherwise, it would be too obvious. So they need somebody in between there who says that we need to do this now because otherwise it's dangerous or whatever. At least we believe it is, and then everybody believes these guys, even though it's not. It's like the opposite. And then they have to create that paperwork. And then once that paperwork is created in the hospital, then you can use that in the population register. There has to be some paperwork, and that's the trick. That's why the bits and pieces are so essential for the system. And it all leads down to the paperwork that comes from the hospital and the paperwork that comes from the church, leading into the population register as breeder documents. And none of that paperwork is done by us. It's all their fiction. And they are worded specifically so that they legally allow that presumption to arise. And that's something I've been grilling these guys. I've been sending, I don't know how many emails asking who specifically decided on this wording of these forms that you fill. Because the choice of terms and words in these, including born alive, allows this shit to happen. So who decided on that? They refused to answer. I had no names. Nobody has even attempted to answer who actually either decided on those terms or accepted those terms to be used, or who suggested those terms to be used. Or no names.
I'm looking right now for a document that got sent to me a while back, and it's actually a hospital document. But what's interesting about the hospital document, and again, everybody focused on the 3 vessels or whatever, but there was a notation up at the top where there were 3 attendants at that, well, I'm going to use the word birth. There were 3 attendants. There was like a nurse, and then there was somebody else, and then there was the DMD, the doctor. And then each of these 3 played different roles in that, we'll call it a delivery, although it's not a delivery unless the fetus and its membranes are delivered whole. We know that doesn't occur. But each of these characters, each of these people were playing multiple roles, and the doctor, and that's, I'm still scrolling just so you know, the doctor actually played one role that nobody caught, and that was, I really just want to get this, I want it to be verbatim. I don't want to just be making shit up. But it had to do with the remains. They were given a title. They were given a position over those remains. And if I can find it'll become obvious to you. It's not obvious to most people, just so you know. But, well, I pointed it out, and everybody kept... Go ahead. Yeah. Keep going.
No, I was saying that so I'm looking at those papers that I have. So, what those papers describe is an actual delivery. Okay? Baby and the membranes. Now, the funny thing is that it's a cesarean section. But the document, the transcription or the record of that operation describes clearly delivery of the baby and the membrane, all in one package. And then obviously, mom is asleep, her dad's not there, and there's only the operation room personnel. And then the physician cuts the cord. And now, then afterwards, they fill in that there was an emergency and they had to cut the cord because it was strangling me, like on my throat. But I'm calling bullshit right there. There's no evidence of that. And you just needed an excuse to cut it.
Right.
Because the paperwork shows a full delivery, and then you had to make the paperwork work for your fucking illusion. So you had to separate, because the paperwork needs to be filled in a way that the property is separated. And then later on, people, some other who are digging into this, they actually sent back those paper. So people who recently had children, so they said that they sent back the paperwork where the placenta was recorded separately, and said that this is not correct, and that you had to add this weight to the weight of the child, and you have to record it, that it's not a separate, it's not a distinct organ, it's not a separate organ, it's everything has to be recorded as one. And these guys actually refused to do that. And think about that. These are healthcare professionals. Everybody fucking has to know the reality, how it is.
Yeah,
they hide behind. Yeah, they are hiding behind a fucking form, saying that this form has to be filled this way. Well, sorry, it's a legal document. It has legal implications. So be fucking careful with the document. You can't falsify. You're falsifying a legal document if you fill it like that. But it has to be filled like that by default, and these guys are forced to do that.
Or they lose their jobs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Okay, I found it. Here's. Let me read this to you. And by the way, I'll put this up. I'll find a way to post this with this call, because I don't think people understand how important it is to have eyes, the eyes to see. You have eyes to see. You can look at something and go, holy shit. And I mean literally, holy shit. So this document was from 2018. Somebody got it was a vaginal, spontaneous delivery. Did you hear that? It says delivery type, vaginal, spontaneous. Now, the delivering clinician, the MD, there were three providers. There was an RN, another RN, and an MD. One RN was the delivery nurse and second delivery RN. The next RN was the nursery RN, second nursery RN. And then these are roles. These are the different roles these people were playing. But then the doctor, the roles the doctor was playing was obstetrician, second delivery MD, midwife, resident, surgical assist, anesthesiologist, nurse anesthesiologist, pediatrician, medical student, nursing student.
What?
And then there were two left. One was scrub tech, but next to the last was backup provider for child. All the way down at the bottom. Yeah. Backup provider for child.
Yeah.
Now, then there was a line that separated the word cord, and then it said vessels. 3 vessels in the cord. Complications, none. Cord blood disposition lab. Gases sent, no. Stem cell collection by provider, no. Now, but then it said placenta. There was another part, a third part of this that said placenta. And this is amazing because it said placenta delivery date and time, separate from baby. So now it has a separate delivery?
Same thing. I have 2 timestamps there.
So this thing is it's now located in space and time, which, by the way, is the definition of a removal. By removing this, by amputating this organ, they now separate it in space and time. It's now in a different place. You're in the present, but the rest residue,
yeah.
but the rest residue and remainder of your biology or your estate is somewhere else.
Somewhere else, yeah. They have to make the distinction that it's a separate property. And then, when it's a separate property, then those rights, those inherent fundamental rights are there in their dreams.
to be abandoned by the baby. And they are. So all of this stuff that you're talking about, all those separate rights, all of the stuff that's attached to the placenta is now abandoned inadvertently, but it's abandoned by us by claiming a birthday for the child, which, by the way, is one thing, as opposed to the afterbirth coming at a different time and different place in time and space. But look at this. It says placenta removal. Now, that's the time and space. Removal is time and space, but it says spontaneous. It actually has the definition of spontaneous after the colon, and I'm going to spontaneous. Look what it says. Produced without being planted or without human labor. Indigenous. And then it says not apparently contrived or manipulated. Natural. So the placenta is...
say again. Say again. Not apparently manipulated.
It says not apparently contrived or manipulated, colon,
apparently.
natural.
Yeah. Not apparently.
But look at. So I'm wrong. I mean, if the definition of spontaneous means indigenous, then it's the placenta. Think about this. It has my biology on mom's land. Does that make me indigenous? Yes. So it's the afterbirth feto-maternal that's evidencing your indigenous nature, you being on the land of mother, the motherland already. You're already here.
Yeah.
So it's the indigenous person that, I mean, I could have it completely backwards. I'm just saying that I always thought the baby coming out out of the womb onto the soil was the indigenous person, but it might be that I'm the one filled with the Spirit of God, which makes me Jesus in the present. And the afterbirth, is the indigenous person separated from me with all of the inherent rights and ownership upon the land. That person has all the rights, titles, and interests to everything on the soil, where me, the baby, disconnected from the soil, is the vessel at sea, out to sea, the commercial vessel. I'm the one with all the energy out here doing all the I'm creating everything out here, but then I got to go through their indigenous person. I'm out to sea. I'm the vessel out to sea. Me, the man, or the baby and the man, but their anchored vessel, their post, is the indigenous person spontaneous. That's the placenta's the spontaneous person, which is the indigenous person. I just corrected myself. And then finally, there was one last line here. Bill, let me finish this because it's so weird. One last line, it says, there's three things for the placenta. There's the delivery time and date. There's the removal, which was spontaneous. And then it says placenta disposition to lab for storage. So I looked up storage, and what does it say? A space or place for storing, an amount stored, and look at this. C says memory. Memory.
Memory.
And then it goes on to say the act of storing, a state of being stored, the safekeeping of goods in a depository. There it is. And then it says the price, storage, the price charged for keeping goods in a storehouse. And then finally it says the production by means of electric energy of chemical reactions that, when allowed to reverse themselves, generate electricity. I'm just saying that they got the indigenous person. I'm correcting myself. I'm saying the indigenous person is now the placenta, the spontaneous placenta, and that person is the one that is being held captive. And it's because my biology attached to the motherland is the evidence of my indigenous nature, whereas me being cut off from the indigenous nature puts me out to sea. I'm out at sea. I'm right here sitting down in my basement in front of my computer. I'm out on the commercial seas, whereas the placenta, the spontaneous placenta, is the indigenous person back home. Back home. Got it? I just corrected myself.
Yeah.
I was wrong, but now I know. Or how's that?
It's so crazy. This is one of the things that I've been struggling is that when you try and explain this, then people have that weird reaction of they refuse to believe it, and it happens with other topics as well. But this I don't know what do you call it, cognitive dissonance or whatever, where you get that immediate refusal simply because of the data that you have in your head about this. So there's you cannot place the information anywhere, so you have to put it in a like suspicious bucket. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know enough about. But
you mean
have that reaction,
probable cause?
Like
Probable cause.
Yes, but this denial, and then people, even without any evidence, they start arguing against you, right? And they just, you've seen this. They come up with explanations on the fly, like literally, like they're just trying to fill in the blanks in their head, refusing to change or open their mind. And that weird reaction, it happens a lot. But what I struggle with is that why do you have to? What's the negative side of this realization? Like, isn't this like the most beautiful thing to actually know? Why are you fighting? Like, why do you refuse? Why do you fight against letting yourself accept, which is self-evident at the end of the day when you go through this? It's not a negative thing. What is more positive than this? Like, what
did you come up with any answers?
No, well, usually it doesn't work. As we start this call, it's so few people where you get into the feeling that you know and you can hear that someone accepts the reality as it is and knows it, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's the greatest thing, right? So it's so weird to have to spoon feed this stuff and to argue with somebody like no, it cannot be true that I would actually have those kinds of powers. Why would you're throwing yourself in the gutter with an attitude like that? It's crazy. I don't know why it's so difficult for people to accept.
Is it responsibility?
Well,
is it possible that because you're talking about 100% responsibility
that must be a big thing about it. People just don't want to. Well, yeah. Well, when you say that word, it leads me straight into communism, because it's like, you exchange everything for some fucking coupon that you then wait to get your benefits from, and you just refuse to accept that. Yeah, it's up to you, and you can't just insure yourself against everything and then act irresponsibly after that. But it's everywhere. I like to say it. I don't want to. Let me say you this. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that people can't take the responsibility. I want to say it this way: that they have been their brains have been filled with information that makes it sound like it's sensible what they're doing. And you have to be able to take the step back. And when you realize the upside, the benefit of the reality, when you accept it, the responsibility is you want to take it, don't you? Because you realize the fucking trade-off. And the trade-off is so bad. So I don't know how to encourage people to just think about it. Don't brush it off, because there's no way. Contemplate your own navel, you know.
Contemplate your own navel. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
When I look at this, and I realize, I mean, people don't understand. They think they're fighting for rights and fighting for freedom and fighting for all this stuff, when in reality they already have it all. We already have all that stuff. It's by our own admission, confession, all of the mistakes we make because of a perception that we've been misled. I mean, we've been misled on everything. All of it. Everything is fictitious. Nature isn't held accountable to any fiction. There are no jurisdictions for the living man. Hell, that's even in their own Bible. 1 Corinthians 2:15 says, the spiritual man shall be judged by no man. There is no way to judge a living man. No other living man has the right to judge a living man. And if judgment does come, if it comes at all, it's going to come after your life is over, if it comes at all. So while we're living and breathing, which is the definition of spiritual. I mean, the spiritual man is just a breathing man. That's all it is. And we've been spiritual from fertilization. I mean, even though Mom was supplying that spirit while we were in her waters, the spiritual man shall be judged by no man. So from fertilization to this moment is all spiritual, unless you claim the decedent position, which is a abortive position, because you've been cut off from life, you've been cut off, and now you have no way to get back to your motherland, your homeland, which I now realize is the indigenous afterbirth. The placenta itself is mother and child, evidencing your indigenous nature to Mother Earth. In other words, the children of the earth are evidenced by the placenta. If we're disconnected from that, we're lost. You could say you're lost in space. You're lost in the sea of commerce. You're lost somewhere because you've been disconnected through the cut. What happens when the knowledge of your wholeness, again, we're back to Luke 5:31, they that are whole need not a physician. When you recognize your wholeness from fertilization, which is your direct link to God, everything going on here. And one last thing about all of this, only living men have rights. I mean, rights are only attributable to property. If I don't have property, I don't have rights, and that includes my own body. If I don't have a body, which began at fertilization, which began with the zygote, which they're now calling the indigenous person, if I don't have that body, which is why they got rid of habeas corpus in 1862 when they brought in civil law, if I don't have a body, then I don't have rights over that body. And that's what they've done. They've done away with rights.
Yeah, there's one detail that is good to note when you talk about that. It's the and this is more on the property right. So basically, when the cut is necessary is because in law the body is not defined as property. It actually cannot be defined as property because we get it as a gift, right? So there's no need to define it as property because there's no question about the ownership. Now, or the dominion of it. Now, why do they need the cut? Because in law, it's only when something is separated, then you have to define the property and the ownership of it. So legally, they also need the cut in order to be able to say that these rights can now be considered as separate and packaged into a legal entity for administration. So
and
these, yeah. But
well,
you see what I mean.
I was just going to add to that. That if you go into all of the law libraries or any of the documentation that has ever been written about a dead body, a body devoid of its spirit, dead bodies have no owners. They're, in other words, they're in that middle area where there is the disposition of a dead body. Now you've got the next of kin that is now trying to do something with that spiritless body. Well, by clamping and cutting the cord and creating a dead body, a dead indigenous person, so to speak, what they've done is they've now created human remains that have to be acted upon as human remains. But if I'm still breathing, if I'm still a living man, and assuming everything you said is absolutely true, when Elvis leaves the building, when my breath leaves this body, now it's considered ownerless. But while I'm breathing, whether they call me the owner or they call my body property, the fact is as long as I'm breathing, as long as this biology is filled with the breath of God, they cannot act upon it as a decedent estate. They needed to cut that material off to give rise to ownerless property, which then becomes what? Res nullius.
Yeah, and obviously that human remains. It evidences that there was a living man. It evidences the origin and the dominion, the rights, the status. But at the same time, since it's severed, it's obviously not living anymore. So what you do is you have to package those rights because they belong to someone. Right?
Right.
So that's kind of the logic there. That's how the presumption arises, that there is something that is then abandoned and nobody is taking care of this. And then the plausible deniability, of course, is that, well, if the owner comes and reclaims these rights, but then the problem is that these guys obviously never expected anybody to come back and say, hey, that's not correct. You don't actually even, there is no grant to you, right? So your claim is void because I never surrendered those rights. I never limited them.
And the fact that you're still breathing proves it.
Yeah, and of course that's obvious, but it's really hard to argue, and that's why it's so beautiful that this all focuses back again and again to the physical reality and the organ, because that's the way you can show that they cannot actually argue against those rights in any other way except making you forget about that. You have to actually redefine yourself, believe in something else than the reality, for them to be able to say that we have the jurisdiction over you. And isn't that what all the books talk about? Right? They just redefine the meanings. They make everybody confused instead of explaining how this works. And the problem, of course, is that for them it's a bigger business, and I don't know what sickness that is. That you have to keep on doing that no matter what. When you have all the evidence, basically, even in the paperwork, to use it in a totally different way and help people to see what. Imagine the amount of energy and creativity that would be unleashed if this was taught a little bit differently, instead of making everybody act like, I don't know, this is total insanity, like people running after whatever bullshit.
I'm with you on this, and this is where it gets amazing to me, and I mean it. The fact that there's a control mechanism stopping us from being creative, stopping us from ownership of our own efforts, stopping us. I mean, when you disincentivize an entire world by placing all property ownership into a trust, that I'm gone. As a producer, I'm no longer part of that communist realm, because you removed my incentive to act, because I'm only going to act if I get to keep the product of my labor, keep the product of my intelligence, keep the product, and then trade it directly. If I have to go through you or ask your permission to buy something or sell something, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with your program, your ideas. But again, those ideas are a trespass upon reality. Let's just make it clear. Everything that's going on in the fiction is a trespass upon reality. Reality. I mean, there are no fictions that apply to any living beings. It doesn't matter. I'm looking at squirrels running around in my front yard right now. They don't give a shit about what you believe. They don't care about Christianity or atheism. They don't care about anything, because nature doesn't give a rat's ass about our beliefs or about our superstitions or about our notions, our ideas. Doesn't care. I mean, it gets punished by us. I mean, the guys in the skies right now dumping all kinds of particulates, calling it terraforming, they're killing everything. Or dumping all kinds of shit into the ground, to destroy everything underground. What I'm getting at is we're poisoning nature by our actions. What you just said to me, though, is if we actually had direct control over our own existence, then we could make this place absolutely beautiful, because we wouldn't poison ourselves. We wouldn't poison ourselves. Abundance everywhere. Abundance everywhere.
It's like that. It's another angle to this. But I've been so all around me I see these buildings, and then if you look at these old photos, and you don't have to go very far back, like let's say 100 years old or 150. You had, like at the same time when all these critical documents were created, like at the end of 1800s, you had all these world fairs. You probably looked at those photos. And
yep.
They were all over the world. So look at those buildings, like. First of all, who's the fucking idiot that decided to destroy them? And then, like, that's a statement of what happens when people can use the resources and creativity without some idiot breathing down their neck all the time. Now, none of us need this shit. It's like we you don't have to be chased and required to apply for all kinds of permissions and licenses and do reporting and all that shit. When you get sucked into that, which is communism, then it sucks all the energy and creativity out of everyone. And we've seen it over and over and over again. instead, if you don't have any of that, that's what happens. You look at these buildings. Nobody even fucking knows how to build them anymore. It's such a waste of,
time.
What is it? What's the right word? Time? Yeah, time. Time, because everything
I'm
else
embarrassed.
is there.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed. I'm actually ashamed of what we've accepted. I'm ashamed that the lowest common denominator is now the court of public opinion, where the people that actually can do things are now being punished by even attempting to do them. Whereas this world communistic charity organization, whatever word you want to call it, where we're supposed to be our brother's keeper, which we are directly by allowing that cut to be imprisoned. I mean, my own biology, I'm keeping that biology imprisoned or safe by my own admission to the birth certificated character. I become my brother's keeper, which means jailer, by the way, to be the keeper. We're jailing each and every one of ourselves by admitting that we need each other to take care of each other. No, you know what? The more I do for myself, the more everybody benefits. But I won't do anything for myself anymore because I'll get punished for it. I mean, if I got to keep 100% of my efforts, believe me, everybody around me benefits because I love giving. I love giving. But if you take everything from me before I have an opportunity, then I'm going to hold on to everything I get because I don't have anything left for me. I don't have anything left for me when you take it before I even have the ability to accept it. They've created a system to where producers don't want to participate.
And then the one of the sad things is that people who start seeing that and they start seeing that this is fucking nonsense. Then and I've had these thoughts myself. It's like I just buy the most remote cabin and just not participate and just get out of it. But it's fine. But we are so few who can see this that I just couldn't put myself to do that. I said, well, then what? I would get bored. I'd rather just get into the middle of it, and I'd rather just keep on nagging these people and just I won't drop the question because I know I'm right. And the implications of that are so huge that I don't want to fucking sit. I could sit in a cabin somewhere or just completely get out of the way and not bother anybody. But what the fuck is the point with that? When we now know how to ask the questions, let's ask the questions.
That's it. That's for me. People ask me, well, I mean, it seems pretty hopeless. It's not hopeless. It's already the way I want it.
Yeah.
Think about how weird that is. It is already there. Mm-hmm. It can be heaven or hell. Yeah, it's already there. It's just that we have to recognize it. We have to recognize it and stop agreeing
and act accordingly.
The nonsense. And act accordingly. Yeah. I'm pretty excited though. Like I said, I'm tired, but I'm excited because it's so obvious. And just so you know, I don't want to forget this. There's a lot of good people. You know it too. There's a lot of good people that are starting to see this, and taking one little action, doing one little thing. Just all these bright lights are going to start to shine. But the worst people that I know are the ones that are still perpetuating the patriot myths and remedy and all that nonsense, because most people want to find out how stop the traffic ticket or how to stop paying taxes or how they want that because that's what's bothering them. I mean, if I step on a nail, the first thing I need to do is get that nail out of my foot, not clean up the street. You know what I mean? In a street full of nails, the answer is to clean up the nails. But if I step on a nail, the only thing I'm concerned with is pulling the nail out of my foot, not cleaning up the street. You and I are cleaning up the streets.
That's a good one.
We're cleaning up the streets. So no nails exist. And the birthday is the nail. It's the nail in the coffin. It's the nail it's nailing the living to the cross. It's the nail. Ouch.
Oh. Ouch.
So, I say this all the time. You and I should probably talk more often. I mean, because it's such a joy. It is such a joy, man.
I totally agree. Maybe we can talk privately. I can tell a little bit about it's been a bit of a weird couple of months. I don't want to get into it here now, but I can tell you about it. It would be fun to share it, but let's do it some other time. But I totally agree. And also, I need these conversations as well. I want it's challenging. You can take it anywhere. Every time there's some new realizations that bulbs, or just like, let me try and find a good word for that. I don't know. Do I want to say hope? Like it's like, it's.
You mean as you and I would define it?
It just feels good. Yeah. That we'll get out of this shit. That's the. That was not the nicest word or way to put it, but I feel us. It's moving now.
Optimism.
Yeah.
A real honest optimism. Again, the truth already is. People don't get this. It already is. And all we have to do is accept it. And the truth is, fertilization to last breath is where our authority, our authorship, our authority, our own private stories are located, as opposed to his story subject to a Gregorian calendar narrative. And believe me, when I talk to people, especially people like you or Linda or whatever, I have epiphanies during the call like I just had today, which is that the placenta, the feto, which is the indigenous person on the motherland, the maternal part of the placenta, evidences the indigenous person. I thought it was the baby, but it's not. The baby is the vessel out to sea on a sea of commerce that is no longer attached to the motherland because we've been cut off. So what I now know is that what they have on deposit is the indigenous person, which evidences our motherland. Now, what's interesting is our fatherland, and we could probably end as soon as you want, but what I don't think people realize is that when that sperm, just prior to fertilization, it's like an asteroid moving through space. And when that asteroid hits the Earth, i.e. mother's ovum, and fertilizes that ovum, what you have is order, the masculine order now, being given to the feminine chaos of the ovum. The ovum is unorganized, but the moment the sperm enters, it organizes the ovum, and it's the zygote, which is order out of chaos. That's the father. So the zygote evidence is the fatherland because it's you and your 46 chromosomes that are now in order out of the chaos. What's interesting is then, that Genesis 2:2 where it says on the seventh day God rested. Well, God is fertilization, it's creation, it's nature. Now all of a sudden we land into the uterine wall and we found Earth. We're no longer disconnected. We are now on Earth, Mother Earth, through the uterine wall. We used to be just floating out in space, even if it's just on the waters of Mother, but now we've landed into the uterine wall, and by extension, we've made it to Earth. And I don't think people understand that now the native is that implantation, and then when the baby comes out, by extension through the umbilical cord, baby then gets cut off from that landing, from that motherland, and gets to become the commercial vessel out there earning a living. In other words, and then every once in a while we get pulled into their port system, to then what? Unload all of our property, you know what I mean, through their what do they call it? Docket or dock. When we're pulled into there. But the problem is none of that's true. It's all fiction. The reality is the biology. And once we get back to the biology, all of a sudden, all of our authority is unified again. We're one within ourselves, which is the right to peaceably assemble. All I have to do is know the truth, start expressing it, start acting it, and I already have it. I'm not waiting for permission.
That's the one of the challenges, that there are so many, all this terminology and all these figure of speech and all these mental images of how this work, and which creates this even the legal justification for them to assume and do these things. You have to force yourself to always get back and think about the natural reality. And as I like to say it, is that the reality is only two things. It's the things that happen without anybody, without anyone, like anyone doing consciously something, which is what happens in nature, like trees grow and wind blows and rains and plants grow and all that. It happens naturally. And then the second thing is that whatever someone does physically, and those are the actions of people, and they they are done intentionally or unintentionally, but those are reality, and everything else is just in your mind. And the greatest way to plug out of that constant mental imagery of what the world is what they want you to see the world as, the greatest way to plug out of it is to just totally focus on just on the things actually happening. What going out, and nature has a big part of it. Has a lot to do with it, because you just go out and walk in the forest or whatever, and you observe the nature, and you even observe, like consciously observe your breathing and things like this. That's reality. And then you just force yourself to question that: what is the relevance of all that other shit that is just forced through our heads? Because it has no relevance. The only thing that eventually matters is what you're doing. And the mental images are put out there to make you do stupid things.
But even if it's through misdirection or being misled, yes.
Yeah. So So it's always a fun. It works for me really well. It's like every time I feel overwhelmed, I'm just trying to reset in a way that I'm like, okay, what if this is the first day of my life? Like, how would I observe it? What would I start doing? If I realize that I'm here and I need to sort of but isn't that the way isn't that the saying that you have to look at the world with the eyes of a child? So basically you just look at it as it is. You don't have to ask questions about it because we don't know, right? You just take it as it is and then you prioritize. And you try to deprioritize the bullshit that is being fed by other people. Because the evidence is so much stronger in the reality, but people just don't ask those questions.
What's really interesting is how they devised a system that ultimately, by our own admission, we enter the public, and this is one of the biggest things for me. And again, I don't want to go 3 hours or 4 hours today. I mean, this is a nice conversation as it is up to now even. But here's the thing, is what they did is they created a character that is, that which you create, you control. They created a public character that they control. But it requires a piece of us, our biology, to be on deposit as the security for that character. A piece of us is now the security for their public character. So it makes us of the public, and that's where the warrant or the warranty for our behavior in the public comes from. It's our warranty or our guarantee that we will behave, which also is the behalf, which is a biological impossibility, just an FYI. On my behalf doesn't exist. So here's one of the greatest court cases I've ever seen that they're speaking specifically about trespass and about the public is Hale versus Henkel. And Hale versus Henkel here was 1906, which is a pivotal year, by the way, I should add. 1906, there's a lot of weird shit that went on as far as church property and things like that. But Hale versus Henkel is, I believe, the first case that establishes the public realm based upon our biology. And of course, they got it all the way by 1933 with the birth certificated character. But here's the interesting thing. The quotes from Hale versus Henkel are so big. Here's one that says, there is a clear distinction between an individual and a corporation, and the latter, i.e. the corporation, being a creature of the state, has not the constitutional right to refuse to submit its books and papers for an examination at the suit of the state. Now, they use the word creature. Well, so does Unum Sanctum. It actually says
that, creature of the state.
Right, and Unum Sanctum uses the same word, creature. And creature,
human
creature. The human creature, and that creature is exactly what they're using. Now, it goes on to say, and I'm not going to read this whole thing. Well, maybe I should, just because it's all connected. It says the individual, again, not the corporation. The individual may stand upon his constitutional rights as a citizen. He is entitled. Now they're talking about clothing yourself in a capacity now as a citizen. So they're speaking of an individual that now is a citizen. But it's a clothing.
And think about this. Couldn't you understand human creature as a human creation? So it's a creation by someone, a man's creation, not God's creation.
But they're talking about
so it's like a very thin line there.
And there is. But here's what's really interesting about the word corporation or incorporation. When I bake a cake, and I have 4 ingredients. I don't want any, bakers out there to yell at me because they're saying, there's more than 4 ingredients, Kurt. I don't care. I'm just using this as an example of 4 ingredients. Those 4 ingredients, in order to make that one cake, must be incorporated together. In other words, the incorporation are those 4 ingredients mixing together to create a cake. The same thing holds true with the bundle of rights, or the fetal-maternal placenta is an incorporation. Yeah. It's not just my biology. My biology has to be incorporated with mom's in order for that birthday cake to exist. The birthday cake itself is the citizenship. Now, here's what's interesting about the rest of the statement, because they're talking about the individual may stand upon his constitutional rights as a citizen. By the way, we're talking about diversity of citizenship here. We're talking about the idea of several states. Several states. In other words, separation. But here's the best part. It says he's entitled. Now, they're talking about the individual. He's entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. His power to contract is unlimited. He, the individual, owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to an investigation so far as it may tend to incriminate or criminate him. He owes no such duty to the state, since he receives nothing from or therefrom beyond the protection of his life and property. His rights are such as existed by the law of the land long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. Among his rights, and here it comes, among his rights are a refusal to incriminate himself and the immunity of himself and his property from arrest or seizure except under warrant of the law. And finally, it says he owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. And there it is right there. I'm not going to use the word individual because that's a legal term, but I, the whole man, knowing the limits of my organization, knowing the limits of my biological organization from fertilization to last breath, it says owes nothing to the public so long as, and this is huge, so long as he does not trespass. Well, wait a minute here. If I leave a biohazard behind on a public road, if I leave human waste, human remains on a public road, which is going to be looked at as a biohazard, if I leave those human remains on a public road back there, now I'm talking about what? I'm talking about Haslam versus Lockwood, where the horse poop becomes waste material left on a public road. If I leave my biology back there on a public road or in a public highway or whatever as a biohazard, I have trespassed upon the public. If people don't understand that me leaving a piece of me behind on the public road is a biohazard that needs to be cleaned up by somebody, when you understand that cut material becomes that, now I'm trespassing upon the rights of the public. And I'm doing it through inadvertence or a birthday.
Yes, and let me add to that this: if you know that it also includes the rights and you hold on to those rights, then that biohazard is just waste material, and the only liability is to not use it as a hazard for others. But if the rights, if you forget about the rights, and the rights are still bundled, then that becomes a bigger question in terms of ownership. And then the trust question becomes more important. What I'm trying to say is that if you look at the obligation of the hospital, what do they need to do with the biomaterial that is left there? The only responsibility they have is to make sure that it does not become a hazard to others. But instead of that, they fill the paperwork so that it creates narrative that it also includes the rights, the powers, and then it becomes a lot bigger problem. It's so
the duality becomes a problem. Potential.
Yeah. So the message and the duality only becomes a question if the man or the woman doesn't know that their ignorance of their own rights creates the duality.
And one other thing about go, because I just have a thought. I'm going to have to get in there because otherwise I'll forget.
No, say it.
So the bundle of rights is a great thing, or a horrible thing. If my fetal property is looked at as waste material on the motherland, it becomes a biohazard. If I recognize me separately from the accretion, the maternal accretion in the placenta, I now recognize a right-of-way over that motherland. And now I have my rights intact from fertilization to this moment, but I also have a right-of-way over Mother Earth granted to me by Mom directly in nature. So the bundle of rights becomes either a biohazard where I forgot my biology on the public, which becomes a trespass, or I recognize my indigenous side, which is evidenced by the placenta on Mother Earth, and I didn't leave a piece of me behind to become the biohazard. Now I become whole with the right-of-way over the motherland, and that's called precedence. The right-of-way, by definition, is a precedence over the ground of another, and I was given that was direct from Mom. There's no middleman between me and Mom, but they created a middleman by clamping and cutting the cord and having that placenta evidence a need for administration or a minister to put me back with it, when in reality, you and I are talking about it right now. I didn't forget about it. I don't need it because I've evolved beyond it, but I'm still using it. So I'd never abandon it either. So knowing evolutionary process, instead of negating it through, I'm not a monkey, Kurt. I didn't come from monkeys. Well, nobody did. So the idea is that evolutionary process from a single cell to a trillion cell, organization like I am today, that's all evolutionary process. I can't deny evolutionary process from fertilization to this moment, but I also can't deny that I landed into the wall of the uterus. Thank you, Mom. Thanks for letting me land there. Thanks for preparing that accretion, that landing strip for me, so I can come to Earth, so I'm not lost in space or not lost at sea. You know what I mean? Thank you, Mom.
Exactly.
Anyway, I love it. Yeah. Thank you. This is way fun for me. way fun for me. All right, you want to do this again in a month or so?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you and I can talk privately in between. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do one that we don't record. I'd like to share a couple of things.
But you're okay with this? I mean, I can put this out on for people to hear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is fun.
Okay, beautiful.
But it's just no. But yeah, let's email about it.
Let me do this. Let me stop the recording, and then you and I can set something up.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to agree on it now? Yeah.
Okay, hang on. Let me do this right now. I'm going to stop this recording.
Okay.